Having played only a few hours of Borderlands, I was able to approach Borderlands 2 with a fresh perspective in order to assess the game in its own right, and not just as a sequel. That said, let's get started. So, after whatever happened in the first game, a new group of Vault Hunters has arrived on Pandora on a quest for fortune and, well, that's about it. They're surprised on their arrival, though, by the game's primary antagonist, Handsome Jack, who's taken over the Hyperion Corporation and is attempting to gain ownership of the legendary Vault, which, as it turns out, contains a deadly war machine thing with which Handsome Jack intends to destroy the planet, or something along those lines. He's also a huge arsehole. So, with that premise in place, the Vault Hunters, that is, the player characters, are dragged into a mission to save the people of Pandora. The fantastic humour that I was well introduced to in the first few hours of the first game makes a return in this one, and I'm glad to say that Borderlands 2 is genuinely funny throughout. There are plenty of games that try to be funny, and sometimes pull it off, but for Borderlands 2, laugh-out-loud moments seem almost effortless.
I should probably clarify, the diamond horse I've been telling you about, it's not a sculpture or anything. It's a living horse that actually happens to be made of... Actually, I'll go get it. What, Stallion? Here you go! What, Stallion? Say hello! That Stallion says hello.
It's also got a great cast of characters, all of which are at least a little bit insane, and all of which are really well written. The voice acting's top-notch too. The player character, of which there's a choice of 4, is for the most part mute, spouting only the occasional phrase during combat. Nevertheless, all 4 classes have a character of their own and are incredibly fun to play. The game's main storyline is awesome enough. According to the internet, it'll give you about 25 hours of gameplay on its own, which is very impressive, and very little of it feels like junk content either. There are times when you occasionally have to spend some time travelling from place to place, but it doesn't take long, and those journeys are rarely boring. There's usually some kind of enemy thrown in to keep things interesting. The one weakness I found with the main story was the boss fights. A majority of them were fine, very fun indeed, but a few kinda missed the mark. 1 or 2 were a little boring and didn't provide any challenge, and there were a few that seemed a little overpowered and unfair. For example, the Gluttonous Thresher boss basically required a shock weapon because of its insanely quick to recharge shield. In my playthrough, I didn't have a shock weapon when I got to it, so I had to backtrack and spend an hour or so grinding through lower level enemies to get myself a decent shock weapon and level up a little bit. It wasn't too bad, but it just felt like that part of the game wasn't geared towards the assassin class which I played quite as much as the others. I'm nitpicking though. In reality, the main story is hugely entertaining and apparently a great improvement upon the first game, though I can't really comment on that. And that's only the main storyline. There are hours and hours and hours of side missions to get through in Borderlands 2, and despite having put over 50 hours into the game so far, I don't feel I'm anywhere near finished. There's just so much exploring of the awesome and highly diverse environments to be done. And then there's the loot. My god, the loot. It's amazing. It felt like every 5 minutes I'd come across a new gun with some kind of cool, unique perk that I'd have to try out, and it brought a variety into the gameplay that's kinda unique to this series. The level of variety in the guns, and indeed any other kind of equipment, including shields and grenades and rocket launchers, is simply astounding. The game throws together a mix of FPS action and RPG elements. While you can't craft and customize your own weapons, which is kind of a shame, there is a very expansive skill tree unique to each of the 4 classes, and choosing which path to take into is damn fun as you can experiment with what each skill brings to the gameplay. As I mentioned before, this can occasionally be problematic. You may find yourself not having the right set of skills to deal with a certain enemy, but it's no big deal. Generally, you can just backtrack and grind through some earlier enemies to level up once or twice, or if you think you made a dire mistake, then resetting your skill tree and starting from scratch with all your accumulated points is an option, which I really like. I haven't actually used it yet, but it's nice to know that the option's there. A staple feature of Borderlands 2 is co-op gameplay. Unfortunately, I didn't get much chance to play this, but what I did play, and forgot to record, was fantastic. It's got everything single player has got, and all of the game's missions are designed with co-op in mind. But playing co-op means tougher enemies, better loot, and altogether more fun. The game, having been designed with co-op in mind, doesn't detract from single player at all, but co-op adds a huge amount to the game and is really well executed, apart from loot sharing, which is sort of a pain. Individual loot drops like we saw in Diablo 3 would have been nice, but that's only a small thing really. On a technical level, Borderlands 2 is fantastic. Gearbox, the developer, have made great improvements over both the performance and graphical fidelity of the first game, and boy does it show. Beautiful texture work everywhere you look, and I love the stylistic cel-shaded look that everything has. It also works really well with FXAA, one of the more efficient methods of anti-aliasing, that is, smoothing the edges of objects. They've also added NVIDIA Physx, which on a good enough NVIDIA graphics card adds some really cool touches, like real-time cloth and fluid simulations and incredibly detailed debris from explosions and gunshots and things like that. It's also really nice to see that Gearbox have decided to support PC gamers so well with this game, and the highly customizable graphics options, which includes a field of view slider, hooray, would make this an excellent PC port. There is but one issue. Some of the menus don't work terribly well with a keyboard and mouse. I played the game for a little bit with a controller and found the menus were much easier to use. Evidently that's the input they've focused on, but I can get over that, and all other controls for keyboard and mouse are absolutely fine. A good PC port, definitely better than average. Overall then, if you have even the slightest bit of interest in this kind of game, then you just have to pick it up, no doubt about it. It's easily the best game of its type, which doesn't really mean much as the only game like Borderlands 2 is, well, Borderlands. But nevertheless, it is an awesome game which you absolutely must buy. Seriously, if you don't buy Borderlands 2, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's brilliant. Incidentally, you can pick it up for a ludicrously low price at ugkeys.com.